Hello again, guys. It is I, Freeze700. We are back with some Warhammer 40K lore. This time we are talking about Jaghatai Khan during the Great Crusade. So the last time we left off with Jaghatai Khan, he was meeting the Emperor. Now, when Jaghatai Khan first met the Emperor, he pledged, just like all of the Emperor's sons, to the Emperor. He pledged his service. He pledged his life to the Emperor. Well, in later books, we find out that in Jaghatai, he wasn't exactly too keen on kneeling to the Emperor. He didn't kneel to the Emperor out of awe or respect. Instead, he knelt to the Emperor because he saw the forces the Emperor had at his disposal. He viewed it as the same notion he made to the cities in his empire that he took over on Chagorus, which was either you surrender or be destroyed entirely. That's the way he interpreted his meeting with the Emperor, was as if the Emperor was giving him those two choices just by sheerly presenting his forces in front of Jaghatai Khan's face. This, of course, was also no surprise that the Jaghatai Khan had kind of a hard time adjusting to being the Emperor's servant, as after all, the Khan was a kingslayer, but not only that, he was a dethroner of governments. So serving a throne that has greater ambitions than anything he's ever comprehended, it's pretty easy to understand why Jaghatai pretty much took to the stars with his legion and did as much as he could to never really be in the heart of the Imperium. He always tried to get away from it. We also see that secretly, despite not enjoying his new servitude, Jaghatai did actually enjoy something about being in the Imperium. As being on Chagorus, he was scared of the one thing that as a warrior should always fear, which is that now that he's took out all of his enemies on Chagorus, what's left? Well, you gotta build a city. Well, Jaghatai didn't care to rule a city. He didn't like that sort of thing. He really had no real drive to govern and build walls and build up settlements. He didn't have this drive. So, the nice thing about being a servant of the Imperium is that now he's faced with a never-ending challenge, which is to quash the never-ending string of enemies that the Imperium has. This is just great for him. So, of course, he took up his legion and set out to the stars, riding out and fighting all the enemies the Imperium has, riding out with maximum speed ahead of the front lines to find and crush all enemies that the Imperium could ever face, or the Imperium has already been facing. Now, speaking of legions, because we've been talking about legions for quite a bit now, the legion that the Khan had, known as the Star Hunters, was also the next challenge the Khan had before him, as the Star Hunters is fractured. Now, if you don't remember that or you don't know that, please check out my lore video on the Star Hunters. Thank you very much. I'll accept those generous subscriptions and those generous views and likes. So, because the Star Hunters was a fractured legion, this pretty much to the Khan was a challenge. Now, the Khan had to somehow reunify his legion and make them into brothers again, rather than roaming bands of pioneer companies who hated and didn't like each other. So, he spent almost a decade on Chagorus, waiting for his entire legion to assemble on the planet down below. Essentially what he did was he sent out a massive message across the Imperium for the Star Hunters to assemble on his call, as they now found their Primarch. Now while he was waiting, he wasn't just sitting on his ass. Instead, what happened was the Khan had the Mechanicum and his own tech marines who were already there start changing the designs of his ships. This was of course a massive secret. No one knew about this. But he made his ships almost identical to regular Imperium ships, so that's why on the outside no one knew that they were tampered with. But what the Khan was doing was he was making them faster, more maneuverable than any other ship in the Imperium. This was something that no one discovered till the heresy. So this is of course going to be a few hundred years afterwards. So after his legion all assembled and made it down below in the empty quarter, if you don't remember where the empty quarter is, please look at the Jaghatai Khan video where he was originating from. Again, nice good video there. Once his 50,000 or so Space Marines assembled, he started to enact Chagorian rituals in the Empty Quarter. Now, these rituals and traditions would essentially bind the Legion together and make them a legion instead of just roving companies. Now, the Chagorian ritual known as the Ascension was a ritual where the Astartes cut themselves to show their loyalties and then rename themselves. Now, the cut itself doesn't have to have a certain spot, doesn't have to have a certain depth. It's just a sign of loyalty. Now, the name doesn't need to be a name that they are well known for. It doesn't have to be anything important. It's just a more symbolic gesture. It's to make them feel more in common with each other instead of dissimilar. After all, some roving Star Hunter bands had names from worlds that totally were alien to the other companies. So by having all of them name themselves right there on Chagoris meant that they all knew who each other were. This meant that they all were brothers again. They were all at least face value, they knew each other. They weren't strangers anymore. After all, this was a big challenge to get 50,000 warriors to all of a sudden like each other. After they all did this little ascension ritual, the Khan made them all fan out and learn the way of life of Chagoris. So in order to learn the way of life of Chagoris, they had to learn how to hunt, learn how to tell tales, learn how to do arts like philosophy, but also learning certain superstitions. If anything, the Psykers that were in the Legion benefited the most from Chagoris, as they learned how to use the warp safer from the shamans, also known as the storm seers, of the planet. Although this breeding of superstition and weird tribal traditions like painting tribal symbols on their armor made Robert Gilliman and Logar very uncomfortable, as it's against the Imperium truth, and it also lacked that true military discipline. So, it was a little rough for his other brothers to really like what he was doing to his Legion. So directly after assembling his Legion and bonding them, he sent them out to the Kolorn Circle. Kolarne Circle. However you want to pronounce it. I pronounce it Kolarn, but hey, that's up to you guys. There, he mixed and matched all of his squads and companies. This is where he did during his campaign on Chagoris with the varying tribes of Chagoris, where in order to get over their tribal differences, he mixed and matched his men from different tribes into the same unit. This is exactly what he did again on the Kolorn Circle campaign, where he took men from different Star Hunter companies and mixed and matched them. I shouldn't say Star Hunters anymore, as they now called each other the White Scars. After his 80,000 sons fought the Kolorn Circle campaign, only 1 in 10 would die from this campaign. That's actually really good, but that is kind of a devastation, as, 1/10 of your legion's pretty much dead. But on the flip side, the reward of this campaign was that the Legion was renewed. It was reformed. No longer was it fragmented, but now unified and together. No longer were they roving bands of strangers who didn't know each other, who only shared genetic similarities. No, now they were like a phoenix. They rose again and together. This was a very amazing beginning to the Legion. This is, of course, completely opposite of Mortarion, as Mortarion completely divided his Legion to fuck all hell. Whereas Jaghatai unified his Legion so tightly that now they couldn't care anymore about what roving band they were a part of or where they come from. Now, in their eyes, they're all brothers in arms. So, back to the topic of the brothers and the warp, though. Jaghatai Khan viewed the Psykers and the warp in a rather positive way, which was most unusual. This, of course, made him very close friends with Magnus the Red and Sanguinius, because Sanguinius was moderately okay with Psykers. So, the three of them all formed the Librarius, which was basically the institution that would train Marines with a Psyker presence in the arts and military functions of the warp, how to use it, how to form it in beneficial ways. This, of course, was a greatly bad thing to most of the other brothers like Mortarion, Angron, Leman Russ, etc. And to make this worse, when Jaghatai Khan came into the Imperial fold, he didn't spend much time to learn about the Imperium itself. So he didn't learn their courts, their laws, their courtesies, their traditions. So, of course, this kind of angered Dorn and Gilliman even more, as, this basically means to them that while, yes, Jaghatai Khan fights for the Imperium, he doesn't really belong to the Imperium. He's not spreading what it is to be in the Imperium, as he is spreading his tribal traditions rather than the Imperium truth. So, yeah, this kind of makes it a little difficult. Now, this is also even worse in the fact that Jaghatai and his legion kept their Chagorian language. They didn't bother learning High Gothic. So speaking to their brothers and to their cousins, the Space Marines, became even harder, as to them, he sounds nothing more like a barbarian. Where to him, he just didn't find the reason to really learn the language. He didn't care for it. All he cared for was his actions. That was something, of course, that his brothers didn't understand. As again, tribal beliefs mixed with this high Roman type culture, it didn't really mix too well. So really, the only two friends in the Imperium of Jaghatai was Magnus and Horus. Now, both of these were traitors in the Horus heresy, but the reasons for why they were friends of Jaghatai was what I thought was very interesting. Jaghatai loved Magnus over all of his brothers, as really all of his brothers viewed both Magnus and Jaghatai as total strangers, which of course, being two outcasts, this made both Jaghatai and Magnus get along really easily with each other. The only issue was their relationship, was the way they viewed the warp, the way they viewed psyker power. In Magnus's point of view, the power of the warp is something that one should bask themselves in and use as much as they can grab. But to Jaghatai, he believes the Stormseer's point of view of the warp, which is that to follow a path as the warp is super dangerous as it is super helpful. In other words, Magnus believes in drowning yourself in the warp, whereas Jaghatai believes in only taking small sips, only quenching your thirst, not to overdo it, as there is much danger in the warp, something that Magnus totally disagrees with. Horus, on the other hand, was friends with Jaghatai, as they were both warriors, and Jaghatai really was always understood with Horus. He never had to explain himself. He never had to speak to Horus for Horus to understand what Jaghatai did, to understand what Jaghatai was, to understand who Jaghatai was underneath all the barbaric traditions and such. This, of course, was something that the other brothers couldn't understand, as Jaghatai never bragged about his achievements like Leman Russ or Fulgrim. He just simply believed that his actions alone should speak for him. But that wasn't exactly practical, as the Imperium was going through the Great Crusade, as other Primarchs are fighting their own battles. They don't have time to look at Jaghatai's achievements and see what he's done. Instead, they just kind of relied on what they told each other of each other. But, of course, this was kind of a disservice to Jaghatai, as even though all the Primarchs viewed Jaghatai as nothing more than a savage, little did they realize that Jaghatai fought almost more nobly and more honorably than the other Primarchs. And while he may not be a part of the main battles going on in the Imperium, he did fight some really glorious battles that are, I dare say, more glorious than theirs. So, it's kind of a mixed thing with Jaghatai. It was also even more mixed point of view with Jaghatai, because there would be a lot of rumors spread about Jaghatai, but Jaghatai never found himself a reason to shatter these rumors. Instead, he just let people believe whatever they wanted to believe about him. He was a grown-ass man in some regards. He didn't care what his siblings believed. All he viewed was that as long as people who actually were close to him, as long as people who actually cared about him saw him for what he was, he could give less of a shit about his other brothers on how they viewed him. Because, again, his actions should speak for him. And that's something that his brothers weren't really catching on to. The last thing I'll say about his brothers, though, for sure, is that even though Jaghatai wasn't a savage, the main reason, though, that a lot of them viewed him as a savage was that every time he fought alongside them, they always recounted how he was always smiling when he was in this bloodthirsty, crazy frontline warfare that he always fought in. he was always smiling no matter how thick the fighting got, no matter how crazy, no matter how pinned down his forces got. He was always there smiling away. This, of course, made them very uneasy around this guy, as he seems a little mentally unstable. But, of course, you also got to count, too, that his tribal beliefs and traditions that he'd always force upon his legion, and that he firmly believes in, this also kind of put them at odds, making them think he was just nothing more than just a futuristic savage. So before you click off this video here, we're going to share one last thing that I thought was really interesting about Jaghatai Khan during the Great Crusade. So this is more or less a tale of the Pale Emperor. Now, this is a tale that the White Scars usually tell each other, but it, interestingly enough, has two different endings. Now, these two different endings are both, in my eyes, they could both be 100% attributed to who the Khan was, who Jaghatai was at heart. They both make sense. But I think it's a very interesting tale because it really sheds some light on the Khan himself. So, what happens in the Pale Emperor? Well, basically what happens is the White Scars are doing their thing. They're outside the bounds of the Imperium looking for either enemies or lost human colonies that they can colonize. Well, they find a human empire that is technologically almost similar to the Imperium. Now, it's kind of different though because the Imperium has space marines, and also by this point the Imperium owns most of the galaxy. Well, immediately this Imperium claims that their emperor is better than Big E and better than Jaghatai. So immediately they open up hostilities against the White Scars, to which the White Scars actually destroyed this new Imperium, this fake Imperium's fleet, rather quickly, very easily in fact, as these are space marines versus just regular humans. And of course they do what they do next, which is invade a planet down below. Now this nearby planet is of course belonging to the Pale Emperor, and these humans do wear power armor. That's cool. Their soldiers wear these power armor that reminds me a lot of the Iron Warriors, in the sense that each power armor has guns on the shoulders, along with guns in their hands. But these are normal humans using the power armor, not space marines. There is a big difference between a human and a space marine who's using power armor. In other words, when a space marine gets all that augmentation, the one augmentation that's most important for the power armor is the black armor, the black carapace that's put underneath his skin. This is to allow him to move and flow in the power armor as if he wasn't wearing it, as if there was no hindrance. A human wearing power armor is going to be very robotic, very clunky. It's going to look a lot like something from Fallout 4, where you see the Brotherhood of Steel moving very clunky, very slow, very powerful for sure, but it's got no grace to it. So it's more of a hindrance to the users. They're not fast enough to react to super fast movements. Well, them going against the White Scars, this was not a good thing. Now, on the flip side, their tactics were really solid. They did almost like a Greek tactic where they would assemble in a tight ball and just have their guns spray outwards at the foes. But the White Scars were too fast for them. So the White Scars just kept speeding around their forces constantly, looking at weaknesses, and then smashing into those weaknesses, killing the dudes inside the power armor one by one. Eventually, there were too many holes in these circles for these formations to work, and of course they got summarily killed. Now, after conquering this, Jaghatai figured, this Imperium doesn't stand a chance against us. So let's send out diplomats, as for sure this Pale Emperor will see the merits of surrendering, as no more people would have to die. So, of course, he sends out his own personal diplomats to the Pale Emperor, to which the Pale Emperor killed the diplomats and sent their corpses back to the Khan. So, of course, this pissed off the Khan extraordinarily, to which he decided to not only now destroy the Pale Emperor and his Imperium, but to also destroy the cities and the citizens inside the cities for just being a part of this Imperium. Now, this was rather extreme in a long point of view, but that's what the Khan does. If you piss him off, he will destroy your city and kill everybody inside it, which is, of course, what he started to do. He took out world after world, annihilating the civilian populaces till finally he reached the Pale Emperor's throne. Now this is where it gets interesting. See, Jaghatai Khan didn't want the Emperor to die. Instead, what he did was he ordered his troops to kill everyone but the Emperor, as it was really obvious this Emperor, this Pale Emperor, only cared about his throne. He didn't care about the citizens inside his Imperium. So after the throne room was cleared, after everybody in his empire lay dead and dormant, well, the Khan approached him, and this is where the two endings come. So the first ending was Jaghatai goes to the Pale Emperor and claims that he's going to leave the Pale Emperor alive as a symbol, as a reminder to all those that are out there in the stars that this is the price of pride. If you cling to pride too hard, then you will lose everything you own. If you don't want to bow before a treaty and lose your Imperium, and you decide to fight, you will instead lose everything and your pride. That is one way the story goes. The next way the story goes is that the Khan instead says to the Pale Emperor he will leave him alive as a reminder to the Khan of the choice he couldn't make. Now this is rather interesting. Now the Pale Emperor has no idea what the fuck the Khan is talking about. But if you remember the beginning of this video where I talk about how the Khan met the Emperor, the Khan viewed it as the same way he viewed the way he conducts his diplomacy, which is surrender or die. Well, when the Emperor met the Khan and he saw the armies that the Emperor had with him, he figured that was the Emperor's statement: surrender to me or get killed. So the Khan is telling this Pale Emperor that he is there to remind the Khan of the choice he couldn't make. He couldn't choose death, the honorable way of dying. Instead, he chose to kneel. That is very fascinating to me. Both endings, in my opinion, 100% accurate. They could totally have happened. As both, you see it where Jaghatai, during the Horus heresy, he stayed with the Emperor because he viewed it as his honor-bound duty. He vowed to be with the Emperor no matter what. So even though he may not like the Emperor, even though the Emperor may actually be the bad guy, he still will fight and protect him because that's his vow. He's honor-bound. But on the flip side, if you look at Jaghatai's journals and his personal thoughts, you see that he does resent the way that he just gave up his empire. Now, he had no illusions that his empire would ever become great. No, he didn't care for that. He has that resentment that he kneeled when presented with this overpowering force. Whereas here's this lowly man, this old person on a throne, who even though he is nothing more than an ant, he still chose to defiantly stay alive to the very end and fight back, even though the force he was fighting was way greater than his. This was something I thought was very fascinating, and a very personal light shed upon who the character is that is Jaghatai Khan. So that is it on Jaghatai Khan during the Great Crusade. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like it if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what it is that you liked most, or what was something that you learned that you never knew before about Jaghatai Khan. Besides that, have a great day, guys. See you guys next time.